know, this urban environment really is killing me, Sarah.
Yeah, me too. Wish we had a place to get away.
I know. It's a shame Club Med costs so much. I am just a poor working class family in Alphabet City. Whatever shall I do?
Based in the South Bronx.
The South Bronx was a thriving community up through World War II. In World War I, that neighborhood was really the suburbs of Manhattan. If you were an immigrant, you moved to Manhattan, Lower East Side most likely. You may have lived in Williamsburg, Greenburg, right over the bridge of the Lower East Side. You may have lived in Hell's Kitchen, depending on if you came by boat or if you came but which way you came. And then when you made it a little bit, when you became more successful, you moved to the Bronx. And in the Bronx, you got a large apartment with big rooms, with sunken living rooms, spacious bathrooms, not like the railroad tenements. And that's how people made it. They felt good to get to the Bronx, and the South Bronx was a thriving neighborhood. But after World War II, the banks made a conscious decision to develop the suburbs as the place for people to move. And they literally drew red lines around certain neighborhoods, which is how the term redlining came about. And no investments were made in those neighborhoods at all. There was no refinancing, there was no remortgaging, you couldn't get loans in those areas. So what happened? Let's say the late 40s, there was no money, big money. And the buildings and the houses held fairly well. They held through the 50s, and they held probably through the 60s. But now it was 20 years later, and things started happening to buildings. Their roofs started leaking, their pointing started going bad. They needed upgrading in their kitchens, or their plumbing started going bad. And they turned to the banks to get an improved, an improvement loan. Or a landlord was ready to sell a property, a homeowner's kids had grown up, was ready to sell the property, and they went to the banks to get a loan, get a refinancing or mortgage, and they couldn't get it. And so what happened? There's no money there. People basically, the only big money that was there was the insurance. And people basically then just milked their buildings for whatever they could get out of them. And by the 70s, the South Bronx was burning. It was burning for insurance money. And it was burning because buildings were going empty. I myself was a housing organizer at that time, and I had the experience of working with buildings that had absolutely no ownership whatsoever. I had landlords come to my office, hand me the keys to their buildings and say, I can't make it here, I hate to leave these people freezing, could you please do your best? It's really a pity that it had to go like this. It had nothing to do with how the people behaved, contrary to the journalism reporting at the time. It had to do with how the money went. And New York City, as a matter of fact, not only did nothing to change that trend, but actually endorsed that trend with something which they called at that time planned shrinkage. And they literally shrunk the services to those neighborhoods. Services for schools, services for transportation, services for healthcare, all got shriveled up, corresponding to the bank input. Mm-hmm. And the city itself moved its resources to other neighborhoods. So Long Island was booming, and Westchester was booming, and New Jersey was booming, and the South Bronx was burning. And so a little green space in the midst of that depression was not only the space itself, but it was a sign, a key, a moment, a space to say, it doesn't have to be this way. We can turn it around with our small resources, our meager funds, but our willpower. We can turn this around. We don't have to live the way it's been imposed upon us. It's a pretty strong statement.
That in one sense, that what you're saying is true, that there's only so many dollars, and when the dollars reach up here, the economy sort of runs out of them. But in another sense, the money wants to go where it feels comfortable with other money. So whenever Manhattan gets built, instead of looking to someplace else, they always build more Manhattan. So the World Trade Center built in '74, again with that period where the crash came, or where the bankruptcy almost came, was built on landfill in the Hudson River. So rather than develop downtown Brooklyn, they built more Manhattan to build that. Same with Battery Park City and the attempt to do Westway. Downtown Brooklyn has finally gotten enough political power, to really answer your question, to make downtown Brooklyn become yet another piece of the city's, where the money goes to feel comfortable. Maybe Long Island City and Queens will be able to do that too. I'm not sure that other places have the ability to make money feel comfortable for whatever reasons having to do with racism and classism and who owns the land that there already is, we've got Halloween going on there, to make the money go to places where it really needs to go to make the kind of community development that we'd like to see happen. So again, I think it's not so much how much money there is, but a beaten path. Money likes to follow a beaten path.
I had an experience with urban gardens in the late 1970s. I was living and working in the South Bronx, down on Little Street Franklin and 163rd Street. And the neighborhood at that time was pretty much abandoned. It was a very bleak neighborhood. We had an apartment that was on a triangular intersection of two streets, so we had a three-way vision out our windows. And in every single direction that you would look, you would see absolutely nothing green. Everything out our window was rubble or abandoned buildings. If it weren't for the snow, there'd be absolutely no indication of a change in season. And I used to worry about the children that grew up in that neighborhood because I felt that they were so color deprived, so seasonally deprived, that there was no way they could possibly start school ready for school when we had this kind of exterior environment, let alone whatever else was going on.
It was a period in the history of the city where it really wasn't very well organized. They had been overwhelmed by the 1970s. It's the truth, but the only way they make money in this city on real estate is they let neighborhoods go down like they did this neighborhood in the 70s. The only way you can make money is to trash the place and then come back in and say, we have a great idea, we're going to make this a nice place. I mean, it was a nice place. And then in the 1970s, they had a policy that wasn't very well thought out. They built these big towers on the periphery, like on Avenue C and along Avenue A. They're nice places to live, and all of the people who were the stabilizing influences, not all, but most, who were the stabilizing influences in keeping the neighborhood from going to hell, moved into those buildings. And as soon as they opened up, it sucked the infrastructure, social infrastructure, out of the neighborhood. And then people moved into cheap apartments. They made the money on the big towers, and then they let the neighborhood go to pot. And then new elements came in and picked up the pieces. Wow. Same as you'll see in all over the city. Yeah. I mean, the South Bronx or Harlem, they let it go down, and then in a coordinated fashion, they bring it back online and say, look what we've discovered. This is a great place for you to live, and it's the new hip place to be. And gardens are, I suppose, a part of that gentrifying process.
And so, yeah, we're fighting against waste transfer stations. We're fighting for more open space and trees, and and it's the results in many cases are quite dramatic. When you think about city bureaucracy, it's unbelievable. Some of the progress that we've made. 2 years ago when I met your mother, when we did the project, and we just did a tree survey. And the whole point was to count how many trees are in Hunts Point and to see how few we had. And we were not surprised. We had like 1 tree per acre. And it was just like...
How does that compare to the rest of the city?
The National Park Service puts out it's sort of an advisory for an urban area. You're supposed to have about 2.5 acres of parkland, green parkland, per 1,000 people. In Hunts Point, in Community Board 2, we have less than half an acre. It's like 0.4 acres. So it's kind of it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. But because of that survey, like, we got a lot of attention. You know, because we like showed it to everybody and their mother. It's like, okay, look what we've got here. It's like, we need some help. And, you know, we have gotten a lot of other trees planted. We've actually gotten a commitment from our local councilman to add, to put in like money for like 900 more trees, which is, you know, quite cool.
When I was working in housing directly, we never did a big renovation project without creating open space. I mean, if there were 4 abandoned buildings, we tore one down and built a park. It made the developer build a park and do the other 3 buildings. There's no question about it that, in the first place, that's true, that there's an understanding that you have to create more open space as part of whatever it is you're doing. The second thing that's unquestionably true is that community participation, both in creating new open spaces and working in parks and public-private partnerships and all that stuff, are going on throughout the city, and you can't stop that. And what the gardens controversy has resulted in is a model of how to create new open space. And you create new open space by the city allowing there to be negotiated sales. Now,
because gardens are the kind of community activism that
like
is
your
not,
spirit.
it's just not good for like the little party politic things that take place in the city. Because if there were a lot of gardens, I bet you there would be like some kind of new independent thing that would like just flower out of it, because it's a different kind of club. The amount of people who are exposed to us, and we're opinionated, as you can tell. And we can, because we are people who don't just sit around in front of a television, we're socially oriented. We actually enjoy talking to people and listening to people. And so we're an influence on, any garden is an influence on its surrounding community in a big, big way. I mean, these are tables that people can come and sit at. And there aren't even benches that people can sit at bus stops at this point.
Right.
The concept of a place where you can park your butt is completely, it's been legislated out. I mean, they're afraid of people not only putting a bomb there, but the bomb of conversation is what I think society is a lot more afraid of.
So do you think you could just tell us a little bit about your participation in this garden, or what you do here?
I pretty much do almost everything here. I don't look at the garden as individual sections. You know, everyone has a different plot, but I kind of do everything. I'm in charge of special projects.
Is it a public land space, or?
It's owned by the city of New York, and I don't know if you know the stories, but this was, you know, a building here at one time, and the building was knocked down as the neighborhood deteriorated, and this garden is almost 20 years old. It was started in 1981, and it's continuously progressing. I've been here for 6 years, and I'm one of the main caretakers of the garden.
What do you have to do to participate? Can't anybody just walk in?
Well, we're open to the public. We have a rule: whenever there's a gardener here, the gate has to be open, so we're open to the public whenever anyone's in here. There's something for everyone to do. You could be licking stamps for envelopes to raise money, to weeding, to building things, to there's something for every capability.
And do you find that this has been had an impact on the neighborhood? Did you?
Oh,
live here before?
definitely. Yeah, this is, you know, kind of the center of the whole block. And I don't live in the neighborhood. I live on 20th and Broadway. But I feel as though this is really my neighborhood, much more than my neighborhood, because there's really no neighborhood in my area.
How are you involved in this garden?
I'm a founder,
You're one of the founders.
and I'm the current president.
Wow. How did you get involved? How did this garden start?
Community activism.
Really?
The community was really screwed up, and you had a choice of either fixing elements of it or just living in a continually bad place. So this was a really crummy place, and I got robbed in it a bunch of times when there were buildings here. And then when they knocked the buildings down, they put a fence up around it, and it had holes in it. And then somebody stole it, and we started playing.
It was a city plot?
It was a privately held building that didn't pay its taxes. A number of buildings. It was 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 buildings, but I think maybe 5. And they didn't pay the taxes, and so it was public property because the city took it for back taxes. And then they didn't do anything with the buildings, and the people who were left in there were burned out, or just they became like a kind of a coral reef full of like little niches that junkies and thieves and maybe a few people with 0 options lived in. And then it got really, really screwed up because they had fires and things were falling off. So the city came and started knocking things down.
What kind of impact do you think it has on the community to have
Oh, a
this space
great
here?
impact, especially for children who don't know, who don't connect food with or plant with their lives.
Uh-huh.
I think it has a broad, or it should. And I think it's wonderful for parents to bring their children here for lunch and see how nature, how wonderful nature is, because it is. I'm a nature person.
Well, of
Environmental.
course, we made it possible for the Uppies to come here. We did. I mean, we lived through the bad times. I can remember coming home from work, and I couldn't walk on the sidewalk because of all the people down here buying drugs in 3-piece suits. We were where one came to buy drugs. And the few of us stayed here through the bad times. And we fought and we struggled and we got it back plot by plot and got rid of the drug dealers, complained and whined and didn't give them a place to do it.
This is the Barretto Street Garden, and there are plots back there which actually need to be weeded and winterized. And this was actually a pretty famous garden. It was started by Henry Font, who lived in that building over there. And actually my mom's house, my mom and dad's house, is the one directly in front of us right here.
So you have a view from the back of that?
Or from the top floor, from the second floor you do, and which is really, really nice. And when it's in full bloom, it's so, I mean, it's beautiful. It's really nice now. And so Henry Font and a couple of like the older residents actually literally built this place.
Wow.
And yeah, my dad actually helped ages ago too. And this summer, we had a group of gardening kids basically who came out like every other day to work on this garden and a couple other gardens, and the Bryant Street Garden, which I'll show you that one too. And that's it. But there's like a strawberry patch. I mean, the rose bushes. Well, no, I guess that was the only one in bloom now.
When did they build it?
Let's see. I have to go by everybody's ages. It's at least like 20-some years old, at least, at the very least. Because I remember it was featured in like some news program when my niece was about 4, and she's now 24. So
Wow.
yeah. And there's a picture of her. It was really cute. It was a picture of her in my father's plot, which was back there, and she's like playing with like a tomato vine leaf or something. It was really cute.
So there's individual plots back here?
Yeah.
And what do people have to do if you...
Just
express
ask. I mean,
interest?
yeah, basically all we did, because it really did fall into disrepair because Mr. Font died, I think, early last year, or no, year before that, and they were all older people, like my father died too. They just, who weren't gardening because, they died basically. And so what our job to do, and it was a mess, when Nino DeSimone is the name of of the Point's environmental projects coordinator, who has he's a naturalist and he just does some amazing things, and he came in and worked with the kids, designed a program, which taught them about gardening, why it was important, the trees, blah, 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 and they did this. So it definitely needs some more, it definitely needs to be winterized, that's what it needs. And, but at that point, but hopefully in the spring, we'll actually be able to see some real results here and do some planting. It should be very nice, but actually more like fall planting. So we've got 2 years before it gets like where it needs to be, but that's okay. I think it was more than a valiant effort this summer.
Nice. How many kids did you have in here in the summer?
I know we had 6 who were like summer youth employment kids, and then there was like 4 or 5 others who just like would volunteer, just like whenever they could.
great.
It was nice. It definitely was.
And have more people from the community started to come in?
Yeah,
to
they
different
see it,
stuff?
and it's just sort of like, once people start seeing something being used, that's when they start like coming around, because it's literally, it's like, who's gonna start? And I know I'm the same way. It's kind of like, but that's like our job now, to like be the starters and just sort of like give people a reason for continuing on with whatever they're doing, and that's it. So it's nice. We really, and then people have suddenly started, because people just automatically assumed that the garden was never going to come back, and it's back.
So that's great.
Yeah, we're really excited about it.
I was involved at that time with a group called People's Development Corporation, and through the People's Development Corporation, we worked with another group called the Green Gorillas to make some green spaces. We had 2 projects in particular that were going on. One was a garden, and one was a park. The garden was also on a triangular-shaped dead end, maybe about a block or so from where we lived, and it was a lovely location. There was a steep staircase of stone that came down, and then there was a triangular shape. And within that large triangle, we built beds, and people from the neighborhood came and gardened. Many of the people that lived in our neighborhood were originally from the South. It was an African-American community primarily, and many people were from the South. They grew up with gardens, they were very familiar with gardens, and they were naturals. There was really very little education needed in terms of the actual how you do a garden. All people needed was the plots, and they needed, of course, some financial assistance to be able to get seeds and gloves and rakes and hoes, etc. So the garden was beautiful. It was a smashing success. It was beautiful. We had some block parties right by that garden, and they were always lovely because the garden itself was so lovely. And then there were a few buildings after the garden, and after that there was a large rectangle of land that ran a good distance. It ran, let's say, almost half a city block in 4 directions. But it had sort of a flat part at the bottom, and then it had a large outcropping of rock, and then it was sort of a hill gently climbing to the top of that plot, and so we called it the Rock Greening Association. And I guess I was the head of the Rock Greening Association with another woman, Callie Sinclair, who lived on Fulton at the time. The rock, when we took it over, was garbage strewn, full of tires, car parts, all kinds of garbage was in there, to tell you the truth, some dead animals in there. It was not a pleasant place. It was a disgusting place. It smelled bad, it was dirty, it was filthy. Working with the sanitation department and with a youth team from a local church that was right there, St. Augustus Church, and neighbors, just all the members of the association. We probably had about 25 members of the association, people who lived in the neighborhood and who were dedicated to changing this around. We cleaned the site, we fenced the site, and we created some little sitting spaces. We knew we never wanted to develop it. We wanted to leave it as a natural space. We created a little pathway, and then you could climb up the rock to the higher part. And it was really an agreeable place to sit. It was the only green space, non-cultivated space, in probably maybe a 15 square block area. And so it was a little oasis, a little respite. As a matter of fact, when Paul Newman came by to film this film called Fort Apache, the Bronx, they chose that site And when we went to them and told them that they couldn't just go there without asking our permission, they said, but this is the only nice place around here. And we said, in the vernacular, no duh. Of course, it was the only nice place around there, and we'd worked really hard to keep it that way.
Eddie just came in. You gotta talk to Eddie. He built that.
But this is a guy you got to talk to at some point when he's not busy.
I got up there a mannequin on a woman's body. So a woman came over to me and she says, you know, you're disgrading the women or something. I said, no, I'm not. I like horses and I like women, so I put them together. So she says, what do you like about horses or something? But I finally got rid of her. I told her there was a horse facing me backwards and you were facing me frontwards. I kissed the horse's ass. Right? that ended the whole thing. And then, like you see, I got a Puerto Rican flag up there.
Uh-huh.
That's politics too. You know, when that wasn't there, all the Puerto Ricans walk by here and say, look at a big piece of junk. They should build a house here. Blah, blah, blah. I put the flag up, and they come over and they bow down to me. They want to kiss me. You know.
There's lots to buy, you know, in the city of New York. Why do you have to go after the gardens? It's so...
And they said it's less than 10%, I guess, is being used for parks and gardens.
Yeah.
That's really a small
Yeah,
number.
there's only about, I think the numbers is like something, it's like less than, I think like 800 community gardens, like active community gardens in
Yeah,
the
I read
city.
750. That was
Yeah, so there, and then there's about 12,000 empty lots.
Do you think a lot of the reason why they would target these lots is because of like the sense of community that you generate here by doing it? So they're like, oh, you've already done all the base work, so now we'll just take over everything you've done.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it's also, a good portion has to do with like where the lots are located.
Yeah.
I do think that it's definitely an environmental justice issue.
Yeah,
you know,
totally.
it's racist in many, many ways. But not even in all the cases, but, you know, literally, like in Hunts Point, like specifically, there are, I mean, I could, on the back of my hand, I mean, there are like 15, you know, privately owned lots that, you know, it's like this. I wish the city would take them over and do something and sell them to somebody who would actually develop them, but you know that doesn't happen. And they've been sitting there for like God. I mean, I've personally like made calls and wrote written letters, just like, you know, this is just a problem. You know, it's like there's one, and I'll show you one that's literally right behind the fire department, and it's such a fire hazard. And actually, somebody actually did try to build a community garden there, but on a privately owned piece of land, and a part of it burned because it was such a fire hazard. And it hasn't been condemned. It hasn't been anything.
Yeah.
It's just like, I don't understand, like the way things are done. It's so
Well, it's funny because Green Thumb used to be part of DGS, which is Department of General Services, and they were really very friendly to us. And then it got moved under, I guess, Giuliani. I mean, most of these sort of things. He consolidated it into something citywide services administration, I think. And then shortly thereafter, it was moved, and these were all things that were without any real, they were just to serve the people. They didn't have any particular purpose except to find ways to serve gardeners. And it was still called Green Thumb. And then he came up with a really great concept that was very subtle, which is he moved Green Thumb under the jurisdiction of HPD, which is Housing Preservation and Development, which clearly has nothing to do with being neutral. So when he moved the Gardens administration, Green Thumb, to HPD, it was the death knell of gardens, because HPD is not in the business of maintaining gardens. They're in the business of having property in a holding pattern until they can find someone they can sell it to.
With a point, we had the Hunts Point Farms, which was this huge herb garden, vegetable garden, flower garden. It was amazing. It was like, I think almost maybe an acre and a half, and we'll show you. And it was so sad because it had been active for like 12 years. It was really, really awesome. And somebody in New York, I think New York City Partnerships actually bought it and said that they were going to build houses. So they raised it. It's all gone. Beautiful, beautiful, gorgeous, gorgeous. And then it's gone. And then people expected them to build these like, single, double family houses, right away. And so, but they didn't. It stayed just like nothing for 3 years.
Oh, wow.
Because he just felt like the city was going to take anything away. It's like, you put all this work and all this love into it, and then it can just be like taken away at any minute.
The in-rem property that belongs to the city that was taken for taxes is not protected. And whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, the fact that it's not been, like national forests that have neither been cut nor declared wilderness, they're not protected land. They're part of the other two. They're either developed or not yet developed. And until land is protected in some way, it will and even sometimes then, but certainly until land is protected, it is subject to the political vagaries. If an administration is being Republican, or if an administration thinks that private control of things, privately held control of things is better, there will always be an incentive to take unprotected city-owned property and sell it. Whether it's my backyard, literally, I mean really and truly my backyard, or somebody's garden, there will always be that incentive to sell it.
That's sad. Which is why working with Parks Department is so important in so many ways, because it really is the only way you can do a lot and keep your land where it's supposed to be.
So do you guys...
And we did just become parks about 2 weeks ago. We had been waiting for 2 years, and we've been trying and pushing to be preserved. And we just actually got our sign, and you can go photograph it. And yeah, we've been here forever. We should be here forever now.
Changing people's minds is an emotional issue, and you can appeal to people in power emotionally, but you have to do it legally, and you have to stress the law, and you have to find the law. And you do that, they have to act, no matter what.
They had a little pool in that garden that they had made with, they had dug a hole and they put plastic in it and they filled it with water, and there were goldfish in it. And they were starting a whole little ecology scene there themselves with their goldfish and everything. And a little boy by the name of Max went to Chinatown and saved a turtle from being cooked. He bought the turtle, he and his dad, and they brought it home, and the mother wouldn't let them keep it. So someone suggested that they take the turtle and they put it in the little pool in the garden. So Max thought that was a great idea. He was 7, I think, at the time. And he went and he took his turtle and he begged them, please take my turtle, otherwise, they'll eat it in Chinatown or they'll serve it for something, and my mother won't let me keep it. So they said, okay, and they put it in the water. Putting that turtle on that piece of property saved the garden, because it became a nature preserve because there was an animal living there. So the city has now deemed that a nature preserve, and they can never touch it because of that little turtle. And Max got a letter from the garden people saying thank you for saving our garden.
Absolutely right. There's 2 cliches that I will throw out now. The first is the environmentalists frequently say all our victories are temporary and all our defeats are permanent. Once you can never guarantee forever. I mean, even the Adirondacks, and the state constitution says they'll be forever wild. But you guys know that that's not necessarily so. They're going to cut down those trees if they need the lumber someday. You cannot guarantee it forever. And once you've cut it, you'll never have the old growth. It'll never be the same again. So all the defeats are permanent and all the victories are temporary. The other one is I have a very close friend, a little to the right of me, who used to say there's only 2 kinds of land. There's land that's been developed, and there's land that hasn't been developed yet. Then he moved from one town to a somewhat snazzier town, and now he believes there's land that's developed, land that's not been developed yet, and land that's protected. And I said, ah, see? Now that you have a better view, you appreciate things. He said, no, I'm just getting older and wiser. I said, well, whatever the motivation is, that's a good thing. The in-rem property that belongs to the city that was taken for taxes is not protected. And whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, the fact that it's not been, like national forests that have neither been cut nor declared wilderness, they're not protected land. They're part of the other two. They're either developed or not yet developed. And until land is protected in some way, it will and even sometimes then, but certainly until land is protected, it is subject to the political vagaries. If an administration is being Republican, or if administration thinks that private control of things, privately held control of things is better, there will always be an incentive to take unprotected city-owned property and sell it. Whether it's my backyard, literally, I mean really and truly my backyard, or somebody's garden, there will always be that incentive to sell it. If there are folks that want to say that those communities that have those gardens are people that they want to keep happy, let's be honest about this, that they want to maintain the votes of communities that have a lot of gardens, like David Dinkins certainly needed to, there will be a hiatus in that sale. What I was saying about the community garden fight recently is that the great success of it is that it allowed those gardens to be protected, where they belong to a not-for-profit that will have, that the Attorney General has to watch, and that will stay that kind of an organization for a very long time and protect that property. It's got to be in some way protected, either through that system or through the system of literally turning it into mapped parkland.
There's stuff donated to you?
Well, Green Thumb, I don't know if you've done much research about Green Thumb. They had a warehouse in Queens that supplied trowels and lumber and some rudimentary types of things. But basically, it was so much of a hassle to go all the way out there that we've only gone twice in the past 5 or 6 years. Mostly, we were self-funded from having sidewalk sales and things like that, or out of our own pocket. But now in the last 2 years, we've been starting to get some grants, and we've gotten some very sizable grants, which is really great because it allows us to do things, much faster than, when you have to spend, so many hours just to raise, $100, and then you have, it takes a lot longer. So it's great that we're getting grants now.
That is great. It's mostly private, just private.
Well, the Carey Trust, and we've gotten some grants from. Let me think. I'm not on the grant committee. Who else gave us grant? Trust for Public Land gave us grants. They're giving us grants mostly for programming, having concerts and children's programs, which we're kind of forced into doing because they want to see that you're really trying to, it's too bad because we just can't just be a garden. We have to be like this community center. So a lot of our energy is focused on that. Hopefully, since we're parks now, it'll take a little bit of the pressure off. We do want to have programs, but it's the part of the space is that it's an intimate space for contemplation, to be quiet, and not have 50 people in here. So it's just achieving the whole balance.
Do you guys several empty lots, but the particular few block radius had been greatly improved by the garden that was built by community people and was in a more a more sought after site for future housing development, because the neighborhood was better in that specific place because people had been putting all this time and effort, without it necessarily being validated by the system or legal or however it was, in increasing the property value and increasing the neighborhood value and increasing the livability of a certain area. And it doesn't seem like that's taken into account, and it also doesn't seem like that's being considered when we're talking about the value of public land. When you're saying that people didn't pay anything on land, they paid indirectly in improving the reality of the place that they lived in, increasing property values, making schools safer, making neighborhoods safer, and those things can't really be valued through a direct economic sense, but they have a value. Is there any way that you know of, or that you can,
There's two things have happened. One is, I think it's Trust for Public Land has a study of what recreational resources and different open spaces have meant for communities and how they work. I'm not sure. They do things like look at recreational opportunities, midnight basketball or whatever, and see that if you have a thing like that, youth crime goes down in those afternoons. So people have done that. And a group called the Citizens Housing and Planning Council, which is mostly made up of landlords that are willing to build low-income housing, has done a larger report that talks about how housing redevelopment and redevelopment in poor communities has really been ahead of the reduction in crime that the Giuliani administration is always talking about. So rather than saying, well, crime went down so the South Bronx became a better place to live, it may be the other way around. The South Bronx became rebuilt in a lot of different ways through a lot of different people doing a lot of different things, and that in and of itself made crime go down. Now, these are recursive things, one affects the other. But those two, one in terms of open space with the Trust for Public Land, and one in terms of the Citizens Housing and Planning Council, have done all of those things. I don't know if that gets you to the point where the city government would ever be willing to say that the sweat equity that people have put into that land results in the land being transferred for nothing.
And Bette Midler buying a bunch of gardens is really, on the face of it, it may seem okay. I mean, great. But the precedent is not that gardens were given to the people. The precedent is that those gardens were sold to the private sector. It may be that private sector party then turned around in a way that capitalist ethics would say is stupid and gave them to people. But nonetheless, they were forced to go through the motions of buying things that we already had and then giving them back to us. And the money was taken by the Giuliani administration for, to make things seem like they're going better. But we already had what they had to go buy and give to us.
If it is being used correctly, then there should be some kind of way that you could either prove that, or, out of all the lots, if there's only, say there's 1,000 lots and 200 of them are actually being used correctly for community gardens, wouldn't that hold more value than a vacant lot or a lot that's being used by Mrs. Jones to grow her own vegetables? Would you not rank them in some kind of order? Like you were saying before, that they're not necessarily ranked, they're just auctioned off. But wouldn't you think that, would there be a process that you could do that to rank it, to have some areas hold more value than others?
Brilliant segue. This would require real community planning, right? Is that what we're here for? There would have to be some way. We didn't do this before, did we? We didn't plot this ahead of time.
No.
There would have to be a way. First, it would require the governing entity, whoever that is, to pay attention to the community.
Exactly.
But it would also require the community to pay attention to what's going on in it and the system that is involved. Now, you asked before how you could do this, how you could save a lot, and I said it's going to require money. Part of the reason for that is that most people don't pay attention. Most people are unaware. And there has to be I don't want to say critical mass, a bolus, a group, a lump of people that are paying attention to a particular situation and are working the system and understand it enough to make it work for them and their community. And as I said before, reversing that, they've got to make the people at the top of the system pay attention to what they have to say. And then when it's like the old joke about the donkey that wouldn't move, and the guy said, you got to be really nice, or you got to be really nice to it. And then he goes up and he hits it with a 2x4, and the person says, what do you mean? You said you have to be really nice. He says, no, yeah, but first you have to get their attention. Once you get their attention, then you have to be really nice, and you have to work through a system that both sides can believe in, and at the moment there is no such thing.
I'm sure the laws are there that call for people to have a better lifestyle. The function of government is, and this is what Green Thumb and things like that should be, is to protect us from greed. And they're not doing that right now. The government is in the service of greedy elements that are strictly about raising the price of everything and building apartments that they can rent for unrealistic amounts. And the city is facilitating for nothing but that. And we're just window dressing.
Hi, I don't have my keys. Where is Charlie?
The lady has the one.
And where is she? Minnie's over here?
Inch by inch, row by row, gonna make this garden grow. Gonna mulch it deep and low, gonna make it fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, please bless these seeds I sow. Please keep them safe below till the rain comes tumbling down. It's a kind of easy song.
At Middle School 181, student he once had who Thank you.
Are tuning in.
Comfortable. Okay. So be good. Go climb.
State. Artist from yeah, what up? Lightning. Would you relationship with Jesus Christ? The Lord's not familiar in the
And so beautiful.
Two car wheels on a gravel where I come. Shack on gravel road.
You'd like to talk about it?
Right here. That I got nothing against the religion or whatever, but listen, you just gotta watch out what you saying to me. You know what I'm saying? Y'all hearing me? That's right. That's right.
Jerry. Beanie Bob!